Hi, I'm Murray, W9EHQ. Over the years, I've perfected a method of soldering PL-259 coax connectors to RG8 and RG58 coax. I use a special technique and special tools. Now, you may not have all the tools that I use, but hopefully by watching this video, it'll give you an idea on how you can adapt it to your own methods. Currently, I have over 246 PL-259s in use in my ham shack and video operations. Through the years, I've made hundreds of PL-259 coax connections, cables for other hams, and things that I've used in the past that are not in service right now. And I have a proven method of reliability. Come, let me show you where all the magic begins. This is my workbench, and this is where all the magic happens. These are some of the tools that I use. First of all, a vise. An air compressor is extremely useful in my procedure. I used it to cool down the PL-259 connector after each solder application. This prevents the dielectric from melting. Another very important tool is the chisel tip soldering iron. Now, this iron is only 56.5 watts, but its massive chisel tip is what makes the difference. It retains the heat when applied to the piece, and if you try to use a soldering iron with a smaller tip or a soldering gun, it will not have the heat retention to melt the solder when applied to the PL-259 case. A pair of dikes, razor blade, pair of pliers, a moto tool with the cutoff wheel, very important in my process. I use solder that's very thin and has very little rosin in it. Makes for a neater connection, less mess, and melts very easily. Sandpaper, a file, and a continuity device. I have a homebrew thing here with some batteries and a little buzzer, and you can use a VOM or any other thing that would indicate continuity. Here's a close-up of the chisel tip soldering iron. It's kind of hard to find these elements. I don't think they make them anymore, so every time I go to a ham fest, I always look for them, and if I see any, I buy them all up. But this is what does the trick. One word of caution: when you go to buy your PL-259 connector, be aware that some foreign manufacturers make them with the center pins a little narrower inside than the normal PL-259 connectors. And the best way to check is to take a sample piece of your RG8U coax. There's no problem with the 58U, it's a very small center conductor. But take your RG8U coax and take the sample connector that you wish to buy and make sure the center conductor goes all the way through the center pin. These are the basic coaxes that I deal with. The one on the bottom is Belden 8214 RG8U. It's been around for a long time. The one in the middle is my favorite, Belden 9913 F7. It's dual shielded, much easier to work with and lower loss. And the one on top is the RG58. My process can also be used with RG8X coax, provided you use the proper reducer. RG8X is a little bigger than RG58 and a little smaller than RG8U. Well, let's get started. Start off with a piece of Belden 9913 F7. Now, my air compressor is located in the garage, and I have a remote control down here in the basement with the pressure gauge. So let's get that fired up, and I'll plug in the soldering iron and we'll get started. First, we'll take our razor blade, and it's the right length that I want to cut. So at the end of the razor blade, I'll just cut a slit down to the shield, and then at the end of the slit, I'll go around it 360 degrees and then take my dikes and peel away the outer insulation. Okay, we've got the coax in the vise. I've got my very thin solder and the soldering iron. Make sure soldering iron is clean. Now we want to tin the entire shield of the RG8U. As soon as I lay a bead of solder here and get rid of the soldering iron, I want to cool off the shield. Okay, it's cool to the touch. Now we'll rotate it in the vise. Don't have to put too much pressure in the vise. And repeat the process again until the entire shield has been tinned, starting where the insulation ends up. Okay, we've got the coax in the vise, and we're about to make the cut with the moto tool. Now this is a very delicate procedure. It takes a lot of practice to get this right, so don't be too upset if you don't get it right the first time you try it with the moto tool. So always remember to wear safety goggles when soldering or using the moto tool. So here we go. I made the cut about a ½ inch from the end of the outer insulation. So then all we do is twist clockwise and pull the excess off. And there you have it. After a successful cut with the moto tool, this is what it should look like. Well, since the cutting of the shield with the moto tool is a very critical operation, I'm going to play that segment over again. I made the cut about a ½ inch from the end of the outer insulation. So then all we do is twist clockwise and pull the excess off. Here you can see a cutaway of a PL-259 connector. Note the threaded part here. The outer insulation gets screwed into the threaded part. The holes in this part of the connector is where the solder goes through to the shield. And of course the center pin is where the center conductor goes into. Here's what it looks like when it's assembled. Now it's time to assemble the PL-259 onto the coax. First we take the shell and place it over the coax. Very important that you do that first. If you forget to do it and then solder your PL-259 connector on, it's kind of embarrassing because you won't be able to get the shell back on. Then we take the center part of the PL-259 and we start screwing it onto the coax. When it gets too hard to turn by hand, take a pliers and keep turning it. Eventually you'll see the shield start to protrude through the holes. So just keep turning it until the shield gets past the holes, and then you meet with the great resistance. That means the end of the shield is up against the center insulator, which is Teflon. Okay, I've done that. And then any excess center conductor protruding from the center pin, you could cut off with a pair of dikes. And it can be trimmed later with a file. Now it's time to solder the connector onto the coax. At this point, it doesn't matter whether you do the shield first or the center conductor first. I'm going to do the center conductor first. Get the solder to flow and then pull it away. Wait a few seconds for it to solidify because the center conductor retains some of the heat. Cool it off with your air compressor. Okay, then you can trim it later with a file. Now we'll do the shield. Okay, now we'll start to do the shield. Clean your iron real good and use the corner of the tip to get the solder flowing in the hole. Cool to the touch. Okay, you want to solder all 4 holes to the shield, but to save time I'm just going to show one more here for the procedure. Again, put the corner of the chisel tip in the hole, get the solder to flow, and then cool it off right away. After you've soldered all 4 holes, you want to clean up the center pin a little bit in case there's any rosin left on there. Take your sandpaper and just give it a couple of twists. And if the edges are rough around the center pin, just go at it with a file. Now it's time to screw the shell onto the body of the PL-259, and we'll check for continuity and shorts. Now with my little buzzer here, I should hear nothing when I go between the shield and the center conductor. Okay, that's good. Now I'm going to touch the shield of the opposite end to the shield of this end, and we have continuity. Now I'm going to put the probe on the center conductor. Should have continuity. That's good. So we have no short, center conductor to shield, and we have continuity shield to shield and center pin to center pin. That's the best you could have.